The massive crystal dome of Nexus Prime sparkled like a jewel against the dark void of space. Inside, hundreds of alien delegates filled the council chambers, their various forms creating a bizarre rainbow of colors and shapes. Some floated in containment fields, others skittered across the walls, and a few simply existed as glowing energy patterns that hurt to look at directly. Ambassador Veltar stood at the center podium, his four muscular arms moving in practiced gestures as he addressed the crowd. His species, the Corvani, had been running galactic bureaucracy for over 3,000 years. They were good at it, efficient, and they never let sentiment get in the way of proper classification. Ladies, gentlemen, and assorted consciousness patterns, Veltar began, his voice booming through universal translators. We gather today for our millennial census update. Time to clean house, as the humans might say. A ripple of what might have been laughter passed through the assembly. The humans were still new here, barely 50 years since first contact, and their colorful expressions had become something of a galactic curiosity. The massive holographic display behind Veltar flickered to life, showing a detailed map of known space. Thousands of star systems glowed like tiny dots, color-coded by importance. Red meant major civilizations. Yellow indicated developing species worth watching, and green showed world with basic life that might evolve into something useful given a few million years. Let's start with the Outer Rim territories, Veltar continued, pointing at a cluster of systems that barely registered on the display. Sector 7 Alpha shows the same readings as always. Abundant plant life, stable ecosystems, no technological signatures. We'll maintain the current classification of uninhabited, but potentially suitable for resource extraction. What Veltar didn't mention, because the scanners weren't designed to detect it, was a tiny drama playing out on the third planet of the Kepler 442 system, locally known as Verdania. Deep in the silver forests of Verdania's northern continent, something beautiful was happening. Thousands of small creatures, no bigger than a human finger, glided between the massive tree roots that formed natural archways across the forest floor. Their bodies glowed with a soft blue light that pulsed in gentle rhythms, like a heartbeat made of starlight. The Glimmers, as they would later be called, had no idea they existed in a galaxy full of other intelligent species. They had never built a radio telescope or launched a rocket. They didn't even have what most civilizations would recognize as individual names. But they were far from primitive. As the twin suns of their system began to set, the Glimmers started their evening ritual. One by one, they settled onto specific branches and flowers, their glowing bodies forming intricate patterns that stretched for kilometers through the forest. From above, it looked like someone had scattered luminous gems across a dark carpet, creating designs that seemed almost mathematical in their precision. The truth was even more remarkable. Each glimmer was connected to the others through a form of consciousness that operated like a vast, living computer. While one section tended to the delicate balance of soil nutrients around the great root systems, another group monitored weather patterns and adjusted the growth of certain plants to create natural windbreaks. A third group maintained the intricate relationships between different species, ensuring that no single type of plant or animal became too dominant. They had been doing this for over 50,000 years, turning their world into a paradise of perfect ecological balance. Every tree, every flower, every blade of grass existed in harmony, because the Glimmers guided it with the patience of geological time and precision of master artists. But to the Galactic Council's sensors, they were just pretty lights flickering in the woods. Meanwhile, back on Earth, Captain James Mitchell was having the worst coffee of his life while reviewing star charts in the cramped briefing room of Earth Station Alpha. The bitter liquid tasted like it had been recycled through the air filtration system one too many times, but it was hot and caffeinated, which made it barely acceptable for a pre-mission briefing. "Sir, the final supply manifest is ready for your approval," said Lieutenant Commander Rebecca Hayes, sliding a tablet across the metal table. She was Earth's leading xenobiologist, and this would be her first deep space assignment. Mitchell scrolled to the list of scientific equipment, emergency supplies, and enough coffee to keep his crew functional for 6 months in unexplored space. "Everything looks good. Hayes, remind me again why Command is so interested in Sector 7 Alpha?" The Council reports show nothing but empty garden worlds. Hayes smiled, her eyes lighting up with the enthusiasm that made her one of Earth's best scientists. That's exactly why, sir. The Council has been cataloging space for thousands of years, but they're looking for civilizations that build cities and broadcast radio signals. What if there's something else out there? What if intelligence doesn't always look like us? Mitchell nodded slowly. It was a fair point. Humanity had only been part of the galactic community for 5 decades, and they were still learning how vast and strange the universe really was. Maybe fresh eyes would see something the ancient civilizations had missed. He had no idea how right Hayes would prove to be. The shuttle Discovery touched down on Verdania's surface with a gentle hiss of hydraulics, its landing thrusters stirring up clouds of silver pollen that sparkled in the afternoon light. Dr. Rebecca Hayes was the first to step onto the alien soil, her boots crunching softly on what looked like crystallized flower petals. "Atmospheric readings are perfect," she called back to Captain Mitchell, who was still running final system checks. "Oxygen levels are actually higher than Earth's. Temperature is a comfortable 22 degrees. This place is like a dream." Mitchell emerged from the shuttle, immediately struck by the sheer beauty of their surroundings. Towering trees with silver bark stretched impossibly high, their canopy filtering sunlight into dancing patterns on the forest floor. The air smelled like honey and rain, with an underlying sweetness that made him want to take deeper breaths just for the pleasure of it. "No wonder the Council marked this as prime real estate," he muttered, activating his recording equipment. "It's paradise." Hayes was already kneeling beside a patch of luminescent moss, her scientific instruments beeping softly as they took readings. "Jim, you need to see this. The bioluminescence isn't random. There's definitely a pattern here." As evening approached, the forest began to change. Tiny points of blue light started appearing among the silver trees, like stars coming out after sunset. At first, there were just a few scattered glows, but within minutes, thousands of small creatures emerged from hiding places in the bark and undergrowth. "My God!" Hayes whispered, watching through her binoculars as the glimmers began their nightly ritual. "They're not just glowing randomly. Look at the formation patterns." Mitchell adjusted his own viewing equipment, studying the display of lights that was spreading across the forest floor. What had seemed like beautiful chaos was revealing itself as something far more organized. Groups of glimmers were arranging themselves into spirals, geometric shapes, and complex patterns that reminded him of mathematical equations. "Hayes, are you recording this?" he asked, his voice tight with excitement. "Every second of it, sir. But Jim, this is just the beginning. Watch what happens next." As if responding to some unheard signal, the entire forest erupted in synchronized light. Waves of blue illumination flowed from tree to tree, creating patterns that stretched for kilometers. The glimmers weren't just making pretty designs. They were communicating on a scale that boggled the mind. Hayes spent the next 3 days documenting what she was seeing, barely stopping to eat or sleep. Her instruments detected electromagnetic signatures that suggested the light patterns were actually complex data transmissions. The glimmers were sharing information about soil composition, weather changes, plant health, and animal populations across the entire continent. "Captain, I think we're looking at a form of collective intelligence that operates like a biological internet," she explained during one of their evening briefings. "Each individual glimmer might be simple, but together they form something incredible. They're managing this entire ecosystem, like master gardeners." Mitchell watched the recording Hayes had made earlier that day. It showed a section of forest where the glimmers had detected a fungal infection in several trees. Within hours, they had guided the growth of specific plants that produced natural antifungals, essentially creating a living pharmacy to heal the damage. "How long would something like this take to evolve?" he asked. "Thousands of years, maybe tens of thousands." Hayes replied, "This isn't just intelligence, Jim. This is ancient wisdom." When they returned to Earth with their findings, the response was immediate and passionate. The scientific community was electrified by the discovery, while military officials saw potential strategic applications for biological computing systems. Politicians, as usual, saw both opportunity and problems. The real test came when humanity presented their evidence to the Galactic Council. Administrative Director Kovacs listened to their presentation with the patience of someone who had heard similar claims 1,000 times before. His species, the Zentari, had been evaluating intelligence for over 10,000 years. They knew what sapience looked like. "Dr. Hayes," Kolvex said, his mechanical voice translator adding an electronic buzz to his words. Your observations are certainly interesting from a biological standpoint. However, individual consciousness remains a standard for recognizing sapient life. These creatures show no evidence of self-awareness, personal identity, or individual decision-making capability. Hayes leaned forward, her frustration barely contained. Director, with respect, you're applying standards that were designed for species like us. The Glimmers don't think like individuals because they've evolved past the need for individual consciousness. There's something entirely new, or entirely primitive. Kolvex replied dismissively. Colony insects on many worlds show similar coordination. It doesn't make them worthy of protection under galactic law. Captain Mitchell stepped forward. Director, what if you're wrong? What if there are forms of intelligence that your current definitions can't recognize? The question hung in the air for a long moment. Around the council chamber, delegates shifted uncomfortably. The humans were asking them to reconsider beliefs that had shaped galactic civilization for millennia. The standards exist for good reason, Kolvex finally said. Individual sapience can be measured, quantified, and protected. What you're describing is interesting, but it's not legally actionable. Hayes felt her heart sink as she realized they had failed. The Glimmers would remain unprotected, invisible to a galaxy that refused to see them. But as she and Mitchell left the council chamber, neither of them could have predicted how soon that refusal to see would become a matter of life and death. 3 months after the Galactic Council's rejection, General Faxmore of the Hegemony War fleet stood in his command center, studying holographic mining surveys with the satisfaction of a predator eyeing its prey. The massive display showed Sector 7 Alpha in glorious detail, with mineral deposits marked in glowing yellow and red indicators that made his 3 hearts beat faster. Rare earth concentrations exceed our projections by 40%, reported his chief mining engineer, a beetle-like creature whose species have been strip mining worlds for the hegemony for over 2 centuries. The crystalline formations alone could power our expansion fleets for the next 500 years. Faxmore nodded approvingly. His people, the Cracks, had built their empire on the simple principle that resources belonged to whoever was strong enough to take them. Empty worlds were just resources waiting to be claimed, and the Council had already rubber-stamped this operation as completely legal. Begin deployment of the mining platforms, he ordered, his gravelly voice echoing through the command center. I want full extraction operations running within the week. What Thaxmore didn't know was that Dr. Rebecca Hayes had managed to convince Earth Command to establish a small research station on Verdania, officially classified as a xenobiology observation post. The tiny facility, hidden in a grove of silver trees, was monitoring the Glimmers around the clock when the first hegemony ships appeared in the system. Hayes was reviewing the previous night's recordings when her proximity alarm started screaming. Through the research station's windows, she could see the dark shapes of industrial vessels descending through Verdania's atmosphere like metallic vultures. Base, this is Verdania Research Station, she transmitted frantically to Earth Command. We have hegemony mining ships incoming. They're heading straight for the primary Glimmer habitat zones. Captain Mitchell, now stationed aboard Earth's newest deep space vessel Defender, received the transmission while his ship was 3 days away from Verdania. His face went pale as he realized what was about to happen. How long until they start mining operations? He asked Hayes over the communication link. Based on their approach vector and the equipment I can see, maybe 6 hours, she replied, her voice tight with barely controlled panic. Jim, if they start blasting holes in the forest floor, they'll destroy communication networks that took the Glimmers thousands of years to build. Mitchell immediately contacted Earth Command, but the response was predictably bureaucratic. Earth's diplomatic corps was already filing formal protests with the Council, but everyone knew those would be ignored. Humanity simply didn't have enough political weight to challenge a hegemony mining operation on legally approved territory. Meanwhile, on Verdania's surface, something unprecedented was happening. The Glimmers had detected the approaching threat through vibrations in the ground and changes in atmospheric pressure. For the first time in their recorded history, their light patterns showed signs of collective distress. Hayes watched in horror as the peaceful spirals and mathematical sequences she had grown to love transformed into chaotic, frantic displays. Entire sections of the forest erupted in rapid, flickering patterns that reminded her of emergency broadcasts. The glimmers were screaming in the only language they knew, but no one in the galaxy was listening except humanity. "They know," she whispered into her communicator. "Somehow, they understand what's coming." The first mining probe touched down near the Great Root Cathedral, where Hayes had first discovered the glimmer's intelligence. She watched through her binoculars as automated drills began boring into the earth, sending vibrations through the root system that connected trees across hundreds of kilometers. The response was immediate and heartbreaking. Thousands of glimmers abandoned their normal positions and began converging on the drilling site, their lights flashing in distress patterns that grew more frantic by the minute. They were trying to form barriers around the mining equipment, their tiny bodies glowing like desperate beacons in the growing darkness. "Base! They're trying to protect their home," Hayes reported, her voice breaking. "These little beings are putting themselves between the drills and their communication networks." From his command ship in orbit, General Faxmore observed the bioluminescent display with mild annoyance. "Increase extraction pace," he ordered. "The local wildlife seems agitated. Best to complete operations quickly before they become a nuisance." As the mining intensified, the forest light patterns became increasingly chaotic. Hayes realized she was watching the equivalent of a massive stroke happening to a planetary brain. The Glimmer's careful coordination was breaking down as their communication pathways were severed by industrial drilling. Captain Mitchell pushed his engines to maximum, knowing he was still hours away from Verdania. Earth's formal protests had been filed and rejected with stunning speed. The Council's response was coldly efficient. No sapient life forms are affected by this operation. Human concerns are noted but not actionable. But Mitchell had received other orders through encrypted channels. Orders that made his jaw clench with determination. Earth Command had made a decision that would define humanity's place in the galaxy forever. Sometimes, they had concluded, doing the right thing meant breaking a few rules. As the Defender raced through hyperspace toward Verdania, Hayes continued documenting what might be the last days of an ancient intelligence that the galaxy refused to acknowledge. Neither she nor Mitchell knew that their actions in the next few hours would spark the first interstellar conflict humanity had ever fought, and change the very definition of consciousness across known space. Admiral Robert Kane stood on the bridge of the Defender, staring at the encrypted message from Earth Command that had just changed everything. The text was brief, direct, and absolutely clear. "Protect the Glimmers. Hold the line. Authorization code Omega-7. Kane had been in the military for 23 years, long enough to know that Omega-7 authorizations only came from the very top of Earth's government. This wasn't just a military order. It was humanity making a choice about what kind of species it wanted to be in the galactic community. "Sir, we're detecting 17 hegemony vessels in Verdania's system," reported Lieutenant Commander Hayes from the sensor station. Rebecca Hayes had insisted on joining the mission after her frantic reports from the surface, and Kane was glad to have Earth's leading expert on the Glimmers aboard. Through the bridge's main view screen, Kane could see the industrial mining fleet spread across Verdania's orbital space like metallic infection. Massive extraction ships hung in the planet's atmosphere, their drilling platforms reaching down into the silver forests like hungry fingers. "Communications. Open a channel to the Hegemony fleet," Kane ordered, his voice steady despite knowing he was about to start humanity's first interstellar war. General Faxmore's angular face appeared on the screen, his three eyes focusing on Kane with obvious irritation. "Human vessel, you're interfering with a legally authorized mining operation. Withdraw immediately or face the consequences." Kane straightened his shoulders. "General Faxmore, I'm Admiral Robert Kane of the Earth Defense Force. By authority of the human government, I'm ordering you to cease all operations on Verdania and withdraw your fleet." The silence that followed lasted exactly 3 seconds before Faxmore erupted in what could only be described as laughter, though it sounded more like grinding metal than mirth. "Admiral, your entire species has been part of the galactic community for barely 50 years. You have 18 ships to R-47. You have no legal standing to challenge this operation. Stand down before you embarrass yourselves further." Kane's response was calm and deliberate. "General, we recognize the intelligence and rights of the Glimmers of Verdania. We will not allow them to be destroyed. This is your final warning. Then you will be destroyed with them. Thaxmore snarled, cutting the transmission. What happened next would be studied in military academies across the galaxy for centuries to come. Kane's small fleet of 18 ships positioned themselves between the hegemony mining vessels and Verdania's surface, effectively creating a human shield around the planet. The first shots came from the hegemony heavy cruisers, massive energy beams that lit up space like artificial lightning. The human ships scattered, using tactics that no galactic military had seen before. Rapid hit-and-run strikes that took advantage of their smaller size and superior maneuverability. Remember, Kane broadcast his fleet as weapons fire blaze around them. We're not trying to win a stand-up fight. We're buying time and making a statement. The Defender rolled hard to starboard, avoiding a plasma torpedo that would have vaporized half the ship. Kane's tactical officer, Commander Lisa Park, had worked out a strategy based on humanity's historical naval battles. They would use the asteroid field near Verdania as cover, forcing the larger hegemony ships to fight in close quarters where their size became a disadvantage. On Verdania's surface, Dr. Hayes watched the battle raging in the sky above while documenting the Glimmer's reaction to the conflict. The tiny beings had never witnessed warfare before, and their light patterns showed confusion and distress at the violence erupting in their peaceful star system. "They don't understand why we're fighting," she reported to Kane during a brief lull in the combat, "but I think they know we're trying to protect them." The battle raged for 6 hours, with human ships darting between the massive hegemony vessels like fighters harassing elephants. Kane lost 2 ships in the fighting, their crews sacrificing themselves to protect beings most of the galaxy didn't even recognize as alive. Then something extraordinary happened. As the battle reached its most intense point, with weapons fire lighting up the entire star system, every glimmer on Verdania's surface suddenly synchronized their light patterns. The entire planet began to glow with a soft blue radiance that was visible from orbit. The effect was immediate and stunning. A wave of psychic energy rolled out from Verdania, touching the minds of every combatant in the system. For the first time in their lives, both human and hegemony forces experienced consciousness from an entirely alien perspective. Kane found his mind suddenly expanded beyond his own thoughts, connected to a vast network of intelligence that experienced time and space in ways he had never imagined. He could feel the ancient patience of geological time, the intricate beauty of ecological balance, and the profound sadness of a species watching its world being torn apart by forces it couldn't comprehend. The sensation lasted only moments, but it changed everything. Across the battlefield, hegemony warriors found themselves weeping as they experienced the Glimmer's collective consciousness. The profound beauty and complexity of what they had nearly destroyed hit them like a physical blow. General Thaxmore's voice came over the communications channel, shaken and uncertain for the first time in his military career. "All ships cease fire. Cease fire immediately." The sudden silence that followed was broken only by the soft hum of ship engines and the distant crackling of cooling weapon systems. In that moment of quiet, Kane realized that humanity had just introduced the galaxy to a form of consciousness so alien and so beautiful that it would force every species to reconsider what intelligence really meant. The silence that followed the Glimmer's psychic contact stretched across the Verdania system like a held breath. Admiral Kane stood on his bridge, watching General Thaxmore's massive battleship drift motionless in space, its weapon systems powered down for the first time since the battle began. When Thaxmore's face appeared on the communication screen again, he looked like a completely different being. The arrogant sneer was gone, replaced by something Kane had never expected to see in a hegemony commander's eyes. Wonder, mixed with deep shame. "Admiral Kane," Thaxmore said slowly, his voice barely above a whisper. What were those beings? What did they show us?" Kane understood exactly what the general meant. The psychic contact had lasted only seconds, but it felt like they had lived entire lifetimes inside the Glimmer's collective consciousness. They had experienced intelligence on a scale that made individual thought seem tiny and limited by comparison. "That's what we've been trying to tell the Council," Kane replied. "They're not just pretty lights in the forest. There's something the galaxy has never encountered before, a collective intelligence that thinks in geological time and manages entire worlds like master gardeners." Dr. Rebecca Hayes' voice crackled through the communication from the planet's surface. Admiral, the Glimmers are trying to communicate with the hegemony ships directly. I'm reading massive increases in their light patterns, all focused on the mining vessels. On his command screen, Kane could see the orbital view of Redania. The entire planet was pulsing with blue light in slow, rhythmic waves that seemed to be reaching out toward the hegemony fleet. Even from space, it was beautiful enough to bring tears to his eyes. General Thaxmore was staring at his own sensor readings with an expression of growing amazement. My ship's psychic officer is detecting direct mental contact attempts. They're trying to show us something about their world, about what they've built here. What the Glimmers showed them over the next hour changed everything. Through careful, patient mental contact, they shared the story of their civilization, 50,000 years of careful ecological management that had turned Redania into a living masterpiece. They revealed underground route networks that communicated across continents, weather management systems that prevented natural disasters, and biological computers made of living trees that could calculate the movement of stars. Commander Lisa Park, Kane's tactical officer, was the first to put the implications into words. Sir, we're not just looking at intelligence. We're looking at a completely different way of organizing consciousness itself. They've solved problems we didn't even know existed. The news spread across the galaxy faster than hyperspace travel. Within days, the encounter at Redania was being discussed on every civilized world in known space. Humanity's documentation of the psychic contact, combined with the hegemony's testimony about what they had experienced, forced the galactic community to confront an uncomfortable truth. They had been blind to forms of intelligence that didn't match their narrow definitions. The first species to respond were the crystalline entities of the Rigel system, beings the Council had classified as interesting mineral formations for over 3,000 years. After learning about the Glimmer's recognition, they reached out through quantum resonance to reveal that they were actually living libraries, storing the geological memories of entire star systems in their crystal matrix bodies. Dr. Hayes found herself at the center of a revolution in xenobiology as more and more primitive species revealed their true nature. The gas dancers of the Orion Nebula turned out to be master navigators who could map gravitational currents across entire galactic arms. The singing rocks of Kepler, 186F, were actually a form of silicon baselight that communicated through harmonic frequencies, maintaining detailed records of cosmic events that stretch back millions of years. It's like the universe has been trying to talk to us all along, Hayes explained to the emergency session of the Galactic Council. We just weren't listening in the right language. Kane, now promoted to Fleet Admiral, established humanity's first interspecies understanding protocol, with former enemies becoming unexpected allies. General Thaxmore, transformed by his encounter with the Glimmers, became one of the most vocal advocates for expanding the definition of sapient life. My people have been warriors for 10,000 years. Thaxmore addressed the council in a speech that would be remembered for generations. We thought strength meant taking what we wanted from those too weak to stop us. The Glimmers showed us that real strength means protecting those who think so differently from us that we almost miss their brilliance entirely. The Glimmers themselves became willing teachers, sharing their ecological wisdom with species across the galaxy. Their methods for managing planetary ecosystems helped restore worlds that had been damaged by centuries of industrial exploitation. Their biological computing systems opened new frontiers in technology that didn't require destroying natural environments to function. Kane stood in the newly constructed interspecies communications center above Redania, watching the planet pulse with gentle blue light as the Glimmers continued their ancient work. Through the transparent walls, he could see ships from dozens of species in orbit, all there to learn from beings they would have ignored just months before. You know what the strangest part is? Hayes said, joining him at the observation deck. The Glimmers aren't surprised by any of this. When I asked them about it through the translation interface, they said they always knew there were other forms of consciousness in the galaxy. They were just waiting for us to develop the wisdom to see them. Kane smiled, thinking about how much had changed since humanity's first tentative steps into galactic society. Maybe that's what growing up really means as a species, learning to see intelligence in forms we never expected. The galaxy was discovering it had never been empty or simple. It had been full of voices that the powerful had simply chosen not to hear. And humanity, the youngest members of the cosmic community, had become the bridge that finally taught the ancient civilizations how to truly listen.